Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Ripley was elbow-deep in a plasma conduit when the door to her workshop chimed, which was already unusual because most of the crew had learned that bothering the human maintenance chief while she was working meant listening to a very creative string of profanity in at least 3 languages. She pulled her head out of the access panel, wiped grease off her forehead with the back of her hand, probably just smeared it worse, honestly, and called out, "It's open!" The door slid aside with a pneumatic hiss, and in walked Lieutenant Olana, all sleek fur and predator grace, with her daughter Pix clinging to her side like a small, wide-eyed shadow. The Ranthii were a feline-descended species, and if you'd ever seen a cat move, you had about 60% of the picture. The other 40% involved retractable claws that could shred through bulkhead plating, reflexes that made human combat training look like a slow-motion ballet, and a cultural tradition of honor so rigid it made ancient samurai look downright casual. Also, their kids were adorable, which was probably nature's way of making sure nobody held a grudge when they inevitably destroyed something expensive. "Commander Ripley," Olana said, her accent turning the R into something that rumbled in her chest. "I apologize for the intrusion. My daughter insisted." Ripley stood up, stretching her back until something popped. "No worries. What can I do for you?" She glanced down at Pix, who was staring at her with those huge golden eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. Or your snack stash. With kids, it could go either way. Pix held something out in her small, furred hands. It looked like a small mechanical animal, about the size of a human fist, with articulated legs and a tail that should have been twitching but hung limp and lifeless. The paint was worn, the metal scratched in places. The kind of wear that came from being loved hard and often. "It is broken," Olana said, and there was something in her voice that Ripley couldn't quite place. Not sadness, exactly. Maybe resignation? "A hunting simulator. It was my grandmother's, then mine, then hers. 3 nights ago, it stopped moving. We performed the rite of release this morning." "The what now?" Ripley asked, crouching down to Pix's level. The cub's ears flattened slightly, but she didn't back away. "When something dies," Olana explained, her tail swishing in what Ripley had learned was a sign of discomfort, "we honor it and release it. We do not cling to the dead. It is not our way." "Huh." Ripley gently took the toy from Pix's hands, turning it over. Her fingers found the seam along the belly almost immediately. "Mind if I take a look at it?" The silence that followed was the kind of thick, heavy silence that made you realize you'd just said something weird. Ripley glanced up to find both Olana and Pix staring at her like she'd just suggested they eat their own tails. "Look at it?" Olana repeated slowly, as if testing the words to make sure they meant what she thought they meant. "Yeah, you know." Ripley popped open the panel on the toy's underside. "See what's wrong with it. Might be a simple fix. Oh, yep, there's your problem. Motivator coil's burned out. Happens with these older models. The regulation circuit probably failed first, caused a feedback loop, fried the coil. Easy fix if you've got a replacement coil, or can rewind this one." She looked up to find both Ranthi still staring. Pix's mouth was slightly open, showing the tiny points of baby fangs. "You can fix it?" Pix whispered in common, the words careful and unpracticed. "Make it not dead?" Ripley blinked. "Well, I mean, it's not actually dead. It's just broken. Broke and dead aren't the same thing." "In our language," Olana said quietly, "they are the same word." "Oh, well, That explained a few things. Right, Ripley said, standing up and moving to her workbench. Well, in human language, they're very different. Broken means it stopped working. Dead means it can't work again. This? She held up the little mechanical hunter. This is just broken. She spent the next 20 minutes working while Pix watched with an intensity that was frankly a little unnerving. The cub didn't move, barely seemed to breathe, just tracked every movement of Ripley's hands with those huge golden eyes. Olana stood by the door, silent, her tail occasionally twitching. The motivator coil was indeed fried, but Ripley had been doing this job long enough to have a personal stash of parts that technically weren't regulation, but were infinitely more useful. She pulled a coil from an old servo motor, trimmed it down, rewound a few sections to match the voltage requirements, and slotted it into place. A quick solder job, a test of the articulation points, and the little mechanical hunter's tail twitched. Then its legs moved, that distinctive stalking gait programmed into its core. Its head turned, tracking an invisible prey, and it let out a tiny chirping approximation of a Ranthy hunting call. Pix made a sound that Ripley had never heard before, something between a gasp and a trill. Her ears shot straight up, and her tail puffed out like she'd been startled. "Here you go," Ripley said, holding it out. "Good as new. Well, good as old, technically, but fully functional." Pix took the toy with shaking hands. She stared at it, watching it move, and then looked up at Ripley with an expression that was pure wonder. She said something in rapid-fire Ranthy, too fast and too complex for the translation implant to keep up. "She asks," Olana translated, and her voice was odd now, thick with something Ripley couldn't identify, "why you would do this. Why you would bring back what was dead. What was released." Ripley shrugged, wiping her hands on her already filthy work pants. "Well, you loved it, didn't you?" She directed this at Pix, who nodded so hard her whole body moved. "Seemed worth saving, then." Pix stared at her. Then, slowly, she turned to her mother and whispered something in their language. It was just a few words, but Olana's ears flattened completely, and her pupils dilated in what Ripley had learned meant shock. "What did she say?" Ripley asked. Olana's gaze fixed on her, unblinking, predatory in its focus, but not threatening, evaluating. "She says, 'Humans fix what they love.'" Ripley felt a small smile tug at her mouth. "Yeah, I guess we do. Never really thought about it like that, but yeah." Pix clutched the hunting simulator to her chest, and for a moment Ripley could see the sheen of moisture in those golden eyes. Did Ranthy cry? She'd never seen one do it, but there was a first time for everything. "Thank you," Olana said, and she pressed her fist to her chest in the Ranthy gesture of deep respect. I do not have words in common for what this is." "It's just a repair job," Ripley said, feeling suddenly awkward. "Really, it was like 15 minutes of work." But Olana shook her head slowly. "No, it is more than that. I think it is much more than that." They left a few minutes later, Pix still clutching her now living toy, still staring at Ripley like she'd performed a miracle instead of a basic electrical repair. Ripley watched them go, then turned back to her plasma conduit with a shrug. Just another day on a multi-species vessel? Humans did weird things. Aliens got confused. Everyone moved on. Except they didn't move on. Not this time. 3 days later, Ripley was trying to recalibrate a gravity plating module when her workshop door chimed again. She'd gotten used to the interruptions by now. Turned out that being the only human maintenance chief on a ship with 63 different species meant you were constantly explaining why human tools were close enough to standard measurements and why percussive maintenance was a legitimate troubleshooting technique. "Come in," she called, not looking up from the plating. The door opened, and she heard the soft pad of multiple sets of feet. Small feet. When she glanced over, she found herself looking at 5 Ranthy cubs, all around Pix's age, all staring at her with those huge, unblinking eyes. And every single one of them was holding something broken. "Oh, boy," Ripley muttered, but she was grinning as she said it. The thing about starting an accidental cultural revolution is that you usually don't realize you're doing it until it's way too late to stop. Ripley figured this out around the time she had a line of alien children stretching down the corridor outside her workshop, each clutching something broken, each waiting with the patience of predators stalking prey. "This is your fault, you know," Lennox said from his position at the secondary workbench. He was a wiry guy with permanently grease-stained fingers and the kind of grin that suggested he found chaos entertaining, which, considering he'd volunteered to help with what he was now calling the Kiddie Repair Brigade, was probably accurate. "How is this my fault?" Ripley asked, squinting at the internal mechanism of what appeared to be a Ranthy meditation sphere. Or possibly a weapon. With alien tech, it was sometimes hard to tell. "You fixed Pix's toy." So? "So now every cub on this ship thinks humans are magic." "I'm not magic. I'm just competent." "Same thing to a kid whose entire culture says broken equals dead," Ivy pointed out. She was perched on a stool, carefully reassembling what looked like a miniature hollow projector. Corporal Ivy Nomura was technically assigned to security, but she'd been spending more and more time in the workshop lately, claiming that watching aliens have existential crises over basic maintenance is better than patrol duty. Ripley couldn't really argue with that. The door chimed again, and a young Lithnai stepped in, moving with the strange, crystalline grace of their species. They held something cupped in their 4-fingered hands, and even from across the room, Ripley could see the fracture lines running through it. "Oh no," Lennox breathed. "That's a memory crystal." He was right. Ripley recognized it now. Lithnai stored their family histories in those things, encoded in the crystal matrix itself. They were supposedly indestructible, which meant when one broke, it was considered a catastrophic loss. The young Lithnai couldn't have been more than the equivalent of 10 human years, approached slowly. Their photoreceptors dimmed in what Ripley had learned was sadness. "Commander Ripley," they said, their voice like wind chimes. "My friend Pix said. She said humans can fix what others cannot, that you make dead things live." They held out the crystal. "My family history is in this. 300 cycles. All the voices, all the memories. It cracked when I dropped it. The elders say it is lost. They say I must accept this and move forward." Ripley took the crystal carefully. The crack ran deep, right through the core matrix. This wasn't going to be a 15-minute job. "What's your name, kid?" "I am called Oren." "Okay, Oren. I'm going to be straight with you. I've never worked on one of these before. I might not be able to fix it. And if I mess it up worse, I can't undo that. You understand?" Oren's light flickered, but they nodded. "The elders say it is already lost. You cannot lose what is already gone." "Yeah, well, I don't really agree with that philosophy. But let's see what we can do." She spent the next 4 hours on that crystal. Lennox brought her coffee twice. Ivy chased away 3 more kids with broken items, promising they'd get their turn. The Lithnai used a completely different data encoding system than anything Ripley had worked with, but the principles were similar enough. Light, refraction, stored information. She couldn't fix the crack. The crystal structure was too specialized. But she could extract the data matrix, transfer it to a new crystal blank from the ship's geological samples, and re-encode it. Probably, in theory, if she didn't accidentally wipe 300 cycles of family history in the process. No pressure, she muttered, hands steady as she aligned the transfer nodes. When the new crystal began to glow with the soft, pulsing light that indicated active data storage, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She activated it, and a holographic image flickered to life. A Lithany elder, speaking in their musical language, telling a story. "Orin," Ripley called, "come here." The young Lithany had been waiting in the corner, so still they'd almost blended into the bulkhead. They approached slowly, and when they saw the hologram, their entire crystalline body blazed with light. You brought them back," Orin whispered. "The voices, the memories. You brought them back." "Well, technically, I just moved them to a new—" Ripley didn't get to finish, because Orin threw their arms around her in a hug that was surprisingly warm for a being made of living crystal. Then they took their new crystal and ran, leaving Ripley standing there feeling like she'd just done something way more significant than a data transfer. "You know what's going to happen now, right?" Ivy said quietly. "What?" "Every Lithany on this ship is going to know about this within an hour." Ivy was wrong. It took 20 minutes. By the end of the week, Ripley's workshop had become something between a repair shop and a shrine. The line of kids had grown to include multiple species, Ranthy cubs, Lithani younglings, even a few Porum juveniles who brought devices that had been damaged by water exposure, which was ironic considering Porum were aquatic. And then the parents started showing up. Not angry, which Ripley had half expected. Not confused, which would have made sense. No, they showed up looking lost. Like they'd stumbled onto something they didn't quite understand, but couldn't look away from. Olana came back, but this time without Pix. She stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "I need to understand something," she said finally. "This thing you do, this fixing. Why?" Ripley set down the tool she'd been using. "Why do I fix things? Why do humans fix things? We have been monitoring the cultural databases. Humans are not the only species with repair technology, but you are the only species that repairs, this way, with such care, such time investment. The other species repair for function. You repair for something else." "Sentiment," Lennox offered from his workbench. "Nostalgia. Love." "These are not logical reasons," Olana said, but her tone wasn't dismissive. If anything, she sounded curious. "A broken object can be replaced with a new one, more efficiently, more effectively." Ripley leaned against her workbench, thinking about how to explain this. "You ever have something that mattered to you? Not because it was valuable or rare, but just because it was yours? Because it was there for important moments?" Olana's ears twitched. "The hunting simulator. My grandmother's." "Right. Now imagine if someone told you that the moment it broke, it stopped being your grandmother's toy. That it was just trash now. Just components. Would that feel right to you?" Silence. Olana's tail swished in that way that meant she was thinking hard. "When my nephew was 6, Ripley continued, he broke his grandfather's old compass, my dad's compass, from when he was in the Navy. Kid was devastated, cried for hours. I spent 3 weeks tracking down parts to fix it. Not because the compass was valuable, you can buy better ones for like 10 credits, but because when I gave it back to him, still broken but working, he stopped crying. Because it still mattered." "But why did it matter?" Olana pressed. "It is an object. Your father was gone. The compass served no functional purpose." "Because my nephew loved it," Ripley said simply. "And when you love something, you don't just throw it away the moment it stops being perfect. You fix it. You keep it. You refuse to let it die. Olana stared at her for a long moment, and then her ears flattened completely, the Ranthi expression for being overwhelmed. You do not honor the death of things, she said slowly. You refuse to let them die. Yeah, Ripley said, grinning. Now you're getting it. Olana left without another word, but Ripley caught the expression on her face as she turned away. It was the look of someone whose entire worldview had just shifted slightly to the left. That night, Ivy stuck her head into Ripley's quarters. Hey, boss, you might want to see this. Ripley followed her to one of the observation lounges. Through the viewport, she could see a Ranthi transport vessel approaching the Infinite Reach, requesting docking clearance. Okay, Ripley said. Ships dock all the time. Yeah, but this one sent a message. They're carrying cargo. For you. From the Ranthi homeworld. What kind of cargo? Ivy's grin was downright wicked. Broken things. The cargo bay doors of the Infinite Reach opened with a hydraulic groan that echoed through the massive space, and Ripley stood there with her hands on her hips, staring at what could only be described as the galaxy's most beautiful pile of junk. There were crates, so many crates, stacked floor to ceiling, marked with Ranthi glyphs that her translation implant helpfully rendered as things like inoperative, ritual complete, and honored and released, and, her personal favorite, grandmother's things do not open. Someone had very definitely opened them. This is insane, Lennox said beside her, eyes wide. This is absolutely insane. Yeah, Ripley agreed, but she was already walking forward, pulled by the same curiosity that had gotten her into engineering in the first place. She popped open the nearest crate and found herself looking at an ancient Ranthi pulse rifle, the kind they'd used maybe 200 cycles ago, before they'd joined the coalition. The barrel was cracked, the power cell housing corroded, but someone had wrapped it carefully in preservation cloth. Why would someone save this? Ivy wondered, peering over her shoulder. Before Ripley could answer, footsteps echoed across the cargo bay. Heavy, measured, military. She turned to find a Ranthi male approaching, older than any she'd met on the Infinite Reach, his fur graying around the muzzle, his eyes carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much combat and not enough peace. Commander Ripley, he said, his voice a deep rumble. I am Captain Thrace of the warship Claw of Remembrance. I apologize for the unannounced delivery. Apologize? Ripley gestured at the mountains of crates. Captain, what is all this? Thrace's ears flattened slightly, and if Ripley didn't know better, she'd say he looked embarrassed. Which was weird, because Ranthi military officers didn't do embarrassment. They did honor and duty, and stoic acceptance of death. Embarrassment wasn't in the manual. My daughter heard about what you did, Thrace said quietly. About the humans, about what you do with broken things. She asked me why we don't do the same, why we honor and release instead of repair. I did not have a good answer for her. He moved to one of the crates, opened it with careful claws, and pulled out a small ceremonial blade. The handle was wrapped in worn leather, the blade itself notched and dulled. This was my father's, he said. He carried it through the Unification Wars. When he died, I performed the rite of release. I was supposed to cremate it with his body, but I couldn't. I kept it. I have kept it for 30 cycles, hidden, ashamed that I could not let go properly. Ripley took the blade when he offered it, turning it over in her hands. The craftsmanship was beautiful, even damaged. You could see where it had been sharpened again and again, where the pommel had been gripped thousands of times. You're not ashamed, she said quietly. You love him. You miss him. And this blade reminds you of him. There's no shame in that, Captain. Thrace's pupils dilated, and his tail went absolutely still. The Ranthi equivalent of holding your breath. In my culture, your culture says broken things should be released. But you didn't release this. Neither did anyone else who packed these crates. So maybe it's time to ask if that cultural rule is actually serving you, or if it's just making you feel bad about being attached to things that matter. The silence that followed was broken by Lennox's whistle as he opened another crate. "Boss, you're going to want to see this." Ripley walked over to find a crate full of musical instruments. Ranthi string instruments, their resonating chambers cracked, their strings broken or missing entirely. Another crate held children's toys, hundreds of them, each carefully wrapped. Another held what looked like personal data pads, their screens shattered, but their cases lovingly preserved. "This isn't just your stuff," Ripley said to Thrace. "How many people contributed to this?" When word spread that the Claw of Remembrance was making the journey to find the humans who fix things, Thrace paused. Every family on my ship wanted to send something. Then families on other ships heard. Then families on the homeworld. We had to limit it to 2 items per household, or we would not have had room for essential supplies. 2 items per household, Ivy repeated slowly. How many households? Approximately 8,000. Ripley did the math and felt her stomach drop. That's 16,000 items. 16,312, Thrace corrected. Some families could not choose only 2. Lennox laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "We're going to need a bigger workshop." But Ripley wasn't laughing. She was staring at the crates, at the sheer volume of things that people had saved despite being told they shouldn't. Things they'd kept hidden out of shame. Things that mattered enough that they'd sent them across space on the slim hope that someone might be able to make them whole again. "We can't do this alone," she said finally. "We're going to need help." She put out a call that night. Not an official one. Those went through channels and bureaucracy and would have taken weeks. No, she sent a message through the human network, the informal web of engineers and mechanics and tinkerers who kept the coalition fleet running despite the official maintenance protocols. The message was simple. Got a situation. Need people who know how to fix things. Bring tools. 3 days later, the first human transport arrived, then another, then a civilian contractor vessel that had been doing repairs in a nearby sector. Within a week, Ripley's small workshop had expanded into a full bay operation, with humans of every specialization setting up stations. There was Milo, a xenopsychologist who'd gotten curious about what he called the Great Repair Movement and decided to document it. There was an older woman named Ivy, different Ivy, this one a master craftsperson who specialized in traditional Earth techniques. There was a kid barely out of academy who'd heard about the project and begged his captain for temporary reassignment. And there were the aliens. Because once word got out that humans were setting up a proper repair operation, other species started arriving too. Not just Ranthi anymore. A Porum transport brought items damaged by water, which seemed ironic until Ripley learned that Porum actually had specific types of water they couldn't survive in, and sometimes precious things got damaged beyond what their technology could save. A Min collective ship arrived with a hive memory storage unit, the kind that contained the consciousness imprints of a queen mother. It had failed during transfer to a new hive, and the Min had been told the data was unrecoverable. They brought it to the humans anyway. More Lithani came, bringing cracked crystals and damaged resonators. One brought a musical instrument that had belonged to their offspring. who died in an industrial accident. The Lithnai parent stood silent while Ripley and her team worked, and when they finally coaxed sound from the repaired instrument, the parent's entire body blazed with light so bright everyone had to look away. But not everyone was happy about this development. Counselor Imrath stood in the cargo bay 3 weeks into the operation, his crystalline form rigid with disapproval. He was old guard Lithnai, a traditionalist who'd voted against human inclusion in the coalition and hadn't bothered to hide his disdain for what he called primitive emotional attachment to material goods. "This is regressive," he announced, his voice cutting through the sound of tools and conversation. "We evolved beyond this. We learned to let go, to move forward, to not be bound by sentiment and nostalgia. And now you—" He gestured at the humans, at the repair stations, at the aliens waiting in line with their broken treasures. "You encourage this backslide into irrationality." Ripley looked up from the Ranthi pulse rifle she'd been working on. She was covered in grease, her hair was a mess, and she'd been awake for probably 20 hours straight. She was not in the mood for philosophy debates. "Counselor," she said, setting down her tools and standing. "How's that working out for your kids?" Imrath's photoreceptors brightened, the Lithnai version of narrowing your eyes. "Excuse me. Your species, your younglings. How's the whole don't get attached to things philosophy working for them? Because I've got 3 Lithnai kids in my workshop right now, and they're not bringing me their parents' stuff. They're bringing their own. Things that broke, things they were told to forget about, things they couldn't let go of, no matter how much your culture told them they should. They are young. They will learn. Will they? Or will they just learn to hide it, like Captain Thrace did? Like probably half the people who sent items here did." Ripley stepped closer. "You want to talk about evolution? Fine. Maybe evolving past attachment made sense when you were post-scarcity and could replace anything. But you know what you evolved past along with it? The ability to grieve. The ability to hold on to memories. The ability to say, 'This mattered to me,' without feeling ashamed." Imrath was silent for a long moment. Then, "Sentiment is inefficient." "Yeah?" Ripley gestured around the bay. "Then why are they here?" Imrath didn't have an answer for that. Or if he did, he kept it to himself as he turned and left, his crystalline footsteps echoing off the bay walls like disappointed wind chimes. Ripley watched him go, then turned back to her workbench and the pulse rifle that wasn't going to repair itself. "That was either really brave or really stupid," Lennox said, not looking up from the Porum water sculpture device he was calibrating. "Can't it be both?" "Usually is, with you." The repair operation continued. Days blurred into weeks. The cargo bay became a strange, bustling ecosystem of species who normally kept to their own sections of the ship, all bent over workbenches, all learning from each other. A Ranthi engineer taught Ivy how to work with their composite metals. A human machinist showed a Lithnai technician how to use a lathe. A Porum specialist in fluid dynamics helped Lennox understand the principles behind their sculpture devices. And through it all, the items kept coming. Not just from the original shipment anymore, but from the infinite reach itself. Crew members who'd spent cycles adhering to their culture's rules about discarding the broken, who'd hidden their attachments like shameful secrets, started showing up with items wrapped in cloth or sealed in containers. A Min worker brought a piece of ceramic art made by their birth cluster before they'd joined the collective mind. "We are taught that individual identity is irrelevant once we join the whole," they explained in their strange, multi-layered voice. "But I remember making this. I remember being alone. And when it broke, I could not bring myself to discard that memory. An older Porum brought a navigation device that had belonged to their bonded partner, who died in a stellar anomaly. Our bonding rituals say that when one dies, the other must release all physical connections and swim forward alone. I have tried. For 6 cycles, I have tried. But I cannot release this. Ripley fixed them both. She fixed everything she could. And when she couldn't fix something, she found someone who could. Or she invented a new technique. Or she stayed up for 30 hours straight until she figured it out. Dr. Milo, the xenopsychologist, spent most of his time observing and taking notes. On the 4th week, he published a preliminary report that started circulating through the coalition's academic networks. Ripley didn't read it. She was too busy actually doing the work, but Lennox summarized it for her over coffee at 2 in the morning. He's calling it the reintegration of material sentimentality in post-scarcity cultures, Lennox said, reading from his datapad. Basically, his thesis is that most spacefaring species achieved post-scarcity economies and, in doing so, completely devalued repair. Why fix when you can replace? Why maintain when you can manufacture new? But humans spent millennia in scarcity, so we built entire cultures around repair, reuse, making do with what we had. Makes sense, Ripley said, trying to keep her eyes open. We didn't have a choice for most of our history. Right, but here's the interesting part. Milo argues that the ability to fix things became synonymous with caring, with love, with refusing to give up on something just because it stopped being perfect. And now that we're in space, surrounded by species who forgot that connection, we're accidentally teaching them something they lost. Ripley thought about Pix's hunting simulator, about Captain Thrace's father's blade, about all the items filling the cargo bay. Not sure it's something they lost, more like something they buried. Either way, you started something. I just fixed a kid's toy. Yeah, and look where that got us. Where it got them, as it turned out, was more complicated than anyone expected. The knock on Ripley's quarters came late one night, late enough that she was actually trying to sleep for once. She opened the door to find Olana standing there, and the Ranthi lieutenant looked wrong. Her fur was disheveled, her ears flat against her skull, her tail tucked low. She was holding something wrapped in dark cloth. I need your help, Olana said quietly. But this is not like the other items. Ripley stepped aside to let her in. Her quarters were small, cluttered with technical manuals and half-finished projects, but Olana didn't seem to notice. She stood in the center of the room, clutching the wrapped object like it might escape if she loosened her grip. What is it? Ripley asked gently. Olana unwrapped the cloth slowly, revealing a Ranthi war mask. Not a modern one. This was old, traditional, the kind worn in ceremonial combat. It was made of some dark metal Ripley didn't recognize, etched with intricate patterns that probably told a story. Or they would have, if the mask hadn't been shattered into pieces, held together with some kind of temporary adhesive that was clearly failing. This belonged to my bondmate, Olana said, her voice barely above a whisper. He died in combat 3 cycles ago. According to our traditions, this should have been cremated with his body, to release his spirit, to honor his journey to the next hunt. But you kept it, Ripley said. I kept it. I am weak. I could not let go. I could not honor him properly. Olana's voice cracked. I held the mask during the cremation ceremony and told myself I would burn it after, when I was ready. But I was never ready. And now it is falling apart, just like I am falling apart, and I do not know what to do. She sank down onto Ripley's bunk, still holding the mask, and Ripley saw something she'd never seen before, a Ranthy crying. The tears were different from human tears, more viscous, but the emotion behind them was universal. Ripley sat down beside her, not touching. Ranthy didn't like casual physical contact, but close enough to offer presence. "You're not weak, Olana. You're grieving. There's a difference." "My culture. Your culture gave you a rule for how to grieve. But grief doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care about traditions or honor codes. It just exists, and you have to figure out how to live with it." Olana turned those golden eyes on her, and they were swimming with tears. "How do humans do it? How do you hold on to the dead without being consumed by their absence?" Ripley thought about her father's compass, about all the broken things she'd fixed over the cycles, about why she did this work in the first place. We remember them through the things they left behind. We fix those things, we keep them close, and we let ourselves feel the grief without pretending it doesn't exist. And eventually, not quickly, not easily, but eventually, the grief becomes less sharp. It becomes part of us, instead of consuming us. "I want that," Olana whispered. "I want to honor him and keep him, and not feel ashamed that I cannot let go." "Then, let's fix the mask." They worked through the night. Ripley had never repaired anything quite like this. The metal was an alloy that required specific heat tolerances, and the adhesive holding it together was degrading faster than she'd thought. But she had an idea, something she'd learned about in her early training, but never actually tried. Kintsugi, the ancient human art of fixing broken pottery with gold, making the cracks visible, making them beautiful. The philosophy was simple. Broken things, when repaired, could become more valuable than they'd been originally. Not in spite of their damage, but because of it. Because they'd survived. Because someone had cared enough to put them back together. She didn't have gold, couldn't use it on this metal anyway, but she had something better. A conductive resin used in ship repairs, mixed with luminescent particles that would glow softly when exposed to certain wavelengths of light. She worked carefully, filling each crack, each break, making sure the structure was sound before moving to the next section. When she finished, as the first light of ship morning filtered through her viewport, the mask was whole. But the cracks were still visible, glowing with a soft blue-green light that pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. "In human culture," Ripley said quietly, handing the mask back to Olana, "we have this idea that broken things, when fixed, become more beautiful because of their scars, because they survived, because someone cared enough to put them back together. Your bondmate's mask was broken. Now it's fixed, but it still carries the story of that breaking, and that's not weakness. That's survival." Olana held the mask with trembling hands, watching the light pulse through the cracks. Then she did something that shocked Ripley completely. She put it on. Ranthy war masks were sacred. They were worn in combat, in ceremony, in moments of profound spiritual significance. And Olana was wearing her dead bondmate's mask, with its glowing scars, standing in Ripley's cramped quarters at dawn. "I see him," she whispered, her voice muffled by the mask. "When I wear this, I see him. And the light. The light is like his spirit, still present, still part of me, not gone, not released, still here." She took off the mask carefully and looked at Ripley with an expression that held too many emotions to name. "I need to do something. Will you come with me?" 2 hours later, Ripley found herself in the Coalition Council chambers, which was not where she'd expected her morning to go. The chamber was full, representatives from every species on the Infinite Reach, plus delegations from the ships that had arrived for the repair operation. Counselor Imrath was there, his crystalline form glowing with what Ripley had learned to interpret as smug satisfaction. And then Olana walked in, wearing the mask. The reaction was immediate. Every Ranthi in the room stood, ears back, tails puffed. A few hissed, in shock or outrage or both. Captain Thrace, sitting in the observer section, went absolutely still. Olana walked to the center of the chamber, the mask's cracks glowing softly in the overhead lighting. She turned slowly, letting everyone see. "I was taught," she said, her voice amplified by the mask, "that holding on to broken things was weakness, that a true warrior, a true predator, moves forward always, never looking back, never clinging to what is dead. I performed the rite of release for my bondmate 3 cycles ago. I spoke the words. I made the gestures. I did everything our traditions demanded." She paused, and the chamber was so quiet Ripley could hear her own heartbeat. "But I could not release this mask. I could not let go, and I hated myself for that weakness." Olana reached up and touched the glowing cracks. "Then I met Commander Ripley. I watched her fix my daughter's toy, and my daughter said something that changed everything. Humans fix what they love. I did not understand it then, but I understand it now." She removed the mask, holding it so everyone could see the luminescent scars. "I love this mask. I love what it represents. I love the memory of my bondmate. And there is no weakness in that. There is only a different kind of strength. The strength to survive grief, to carry it, to let it become part of me, rather than destroying me." Counselor Imrath's glow intensified. "This is exactly the kind of regressive emotional." "I have loved and lost." Olana cut him off, her voice sharp. "Have you? Have you ever cared for something so deeply that losing it felt like losing part of yourself? Or have you evolved past that too? Past connection? Past meaning? Past everything that makes life worth living?" Imrath went dark, the Lithne equivalent of stunned silence. Olana looked around the chamber. The humans did not teach us to fix things. They reminded us that it is okay to love things enough to want to save them. They reminded us that broken does not mean worthless. They reminded us that we are allowed to grieve, to remember, to hold on to what matters. She held up the mask. "This is my bondmate's mask. It was broken. Now it is fixed. And I will wear it with pride, not shame, because every glowing crack is a reminder that love survives even death." She turned and walked out, still holding the mask, leaving a chamber full of stunned silence behind her. Ripley followed her out, catching up in the corridor. "That was necessary," Olana said firmly. Then, quieter. "Thank you for fixing more than just the mask. I just did the repair work." "No." Olana's tail swished, and this time it was a gesture of warmth. "You did much more than that." Over the next few days, something shifted on the Infinite Reach. Ripley noticed it in small ways first. Ranthi crew members carrying items they'd previously kept hidden, wearing them openly. A Lithnite technician with a repaired crystal hanging from their uniform. A Porum with a fixed navigation device mounted on their workstation. And then the ships started arriving again. Not transports this time, but personal vessels, small craft, shuttles. Ships from across the coalition, all carrying 1 or 2 items, all requesting just a few hours in the repair bay.